Our second test for our 10-step self-screen is our breathing assessment. Our breathing underpins every way we move. So it's important for us to assess it and test whether we may have a faulty breathing pattern, but most importantly, to kit you out with some breathing drills to help rectify the pattern to allow you to get straight back into exercise. So what I want you to do is take a deep breath for me. Now, if you did any of these things, we may have a faulty breathing pattern. If you breathe in through your mouth, or you raise those shoulders excessively, we're not diaphragmatically breathing. Now, instead of going and worrying about we're not breathing properly and wondering why this may affect our exercise, here's a couple of exercises you can use to rectify that faulty breathing pattern that you can do at home or before your session. The first one being crocodile breathing. This is where we lay on the floor and we use the floor as proprioceptive feedback, i.e. we breathe into the floor, into our belly to allow us to expand our abdominal area and push our diaphragm down. Let's take a look at how we do it. It's a simple setup, laying on our stomach. Now this is where we use the floor to give us feedback so we know we're breathing into the right place. We put our head on our hands and we simply breathe into our belly, trying to expand our belly as big as we can throughout deep nasal breaths. So that's breaths through the nose. So, pretty simple. You should feel that area expand while you breathe in through the nose, and we do that as much as we need until we feel like we can do it without too much thinking. We then bring that into laying on our back, up into our seated position here, and we try and maintain that diaphragmatic breathing. We can do things like keeping our hands around our belly and breathing into our hands. And we can focus on our breathing patterns there. So how do we add this to our exercise? Quite often we're going to lose our breath pattern when we get tired or we start to get fatigued or we're lifting heavy weights. So the plan is when we bring our diaphragmatic breathing into our training, if we're lifting heavy and require tension, we want to take some tension through the midsection, i.e. tensing a little bit, and then still maintaining that diaphragmatic breath. So we take tension, and we breathe in through our nose. That braces our midsection and allows us to bear weight. When we're fatigued, if we're doing something a little bit more high intensity, we should focus on those nasal breaths and breathing as deep into our belly as possible to calm our breath down in whichever position we're in. Our third test for our 10-step self-screen is one of our clearing tests. And now remembering from our very first rule when you started, pain. What we're looking for through this clearing test is just pain. Stiffness is okay. We're going to work on that later. So we're going to go through a lower back or spinal clearing assessment, which will also incorporate a little bit of shoulder mobility, a little bit of hamstring flexibility. So you might find that you are a little bit stiff, and that's more than okay. We'll touch on that later. First up, we're going to go into a simple downward dog pose. And then we'll roll into a cobra pose and then finally finish off with a child's pose. So let's take a look at our first clearing test. Simple downward dog pose. Bum goes to the roof and we're looking for our shoulders and back to see if there's any pain there. We're rolling into cobra now. The idea is to extend nice and long through the spine, and we're looking for any discomfort or pain through the lower back. And finally into child's pose, where we're sitting on our feet. We're reaching out as far as we can and we're looking for any pain in those movements as well. So like I said, it's simply just pain. If we've got no pain throughout the movement and a little bit of stiffness, we can move on. So our power muscles, the old glutes, often cop a lot of work in our lifting, running, and our sedentary sitting lives. So it's important that we know how to release those glutes, And I'm also going to take you through a lateral hip release to show you how to release those sides of your hips, which will also become tight and stiff if you spend long hours at the desk or you take up those bipedal activities such as running. So the positional stuff for our glute release, which we'll work on today, I want you to think of two things, and it's all about your clothing. So I want you to think about the top of your back pocket and then your belt line. So working our glute release, which is going to release our piriformis and the surrounding area, we're looking for placing that ball at the top of our pocket on our jeans. So that's the easiest way to think about it, but that's going to look like so. So it's going to be on the little higher side of your glutes, but we're simply going to wedge that in. And the way to find it is we're simply just going to roll around until we hit that trigger point on that piriformis. Now, you'll know that when you either grimace, your face changes, or you might take a deep breath, or you might feel that referral pain or referral discomfort down your leg, meaning we're hitting the nerve that runs down your leg. And what we're going to do is simply sit on that position, and we're going to start doing some clamshells. Once we do 4 or so clamshells there, we're going to go into some kicks, 4 kicks, and then from there we're going to go into pivots. So we're going to draw a circle with our glutes on the floor. So by keeping the pressure on that ball, we're going to circle one way and then circle back the other. And you can repeat that as many times as you need to release your glutes. Now, your lateral hip release, we're thinking of that belt line. So from the piriformis, we're going to come up a little bit, and then we're also going to lay on a side supported position to hit that lateral part of our hip. So side supported, we can extend that bottom leg, and we use our top leg to brace our position. Now we're simply bringing our hips up off the ground, and we're going to cross friction left and right or back and forth across that lateral aspect of our hip. Now this might also trigger some referral pain down the sciatic nerve, and that's okay too. We simply take more weight on the elbow and more weight on the leg in order to keep ourselves up off the ball into a position that we can maintain tension or pressure on it, but not push into pain. So we're simply going to pivot back and forth along that lateral hip line as far as we need to feel that release. There you have it, guys. Lateral hip, glute release to keep those power muscles in working order. Long days of sitting, we all suffer from a little bit of lower back stiffness or pain. Here's a nice little QL release we can do to help release the tension in our lower back that'll help free up our posture and avoid some of that negative effect when we spend long days at the desk. So we're aiming for our QL. That is located on the side of our, next to our spine in that section in our lower back. What you would probably think of as the bit next to the gap where your kidneys are. But that muscle we're aiming for the edge of that muscle. We're going to grab that ball and we're going to find that edge. We're going to lay down. We're going to bring this leg up over the other leg, and we're simply pivoting over that QL. At no stage should this ball go over your spine. If you've gone over your spine, you've come too far into the midline, and you need to get it on the edge of that muscle. So when you're rolling across it, it should be going out away from you. Once you hit a sore spot, spend some time in there. Breathe into the ball using our diaphragmatic breath. Once the pain drops away, back into those little cross frictions as we go. There you have it, guys. Make sure you do both sides. Notice if there's any difference between sides, but that should help offset some of that sitting and postural stuff that we have when we're at the desk all day. So you've been sitting at the desk all day and you want to get out for a run or get to the gym and get the most out of your training. If we've been in this position, sitting, regardless if it's sitting just on the floor or sitting in an office chair all day, we want to make sure our hip flexors are in good condition to make sure we can get into full hip extension to make sure we're maximizing our training. So our psoas, which is a group of muscles that works from your lower back all the way through the front of your hips, which incorporates hip extension. What we want to use is our trigger point ball here, and we're going to do a psoas release, which is going to be located an inch beside our belly button. Now, pretty easy to find for yourself when you put your finger in your belly button and we go an inch beside it. We're going to get that ball, we're going to lay down on it, and I'm going to show you a couple of ways to help release those hip flexors to help you get into full extension. So, ball, inch beside the belly button, and we're laying down. We're simply just going to wriggle around until we find that trigger point. If you don't have a trigger point here or you can't find the stiffness, that's actually a good thing. It means our hip flexors probably are in relatively good shape, or we just simply don't have any work we need to do here, or we simply missed it, which isn't a bad thing. But we'll cover off on a lot of hip extension drills in our mobility section. So if you can't get this particular one, because it can be tricky, don't worry, we'll loop around, we'll get it anyway. So once we find that point, we're simply going to breathe in, into the ball. And on the breath out, we're going to arch up. Once we come back down, we're going to breathe in again. But this time when we arch up, we're going to grab some traction off the floor and try and pull ourselves a little bit across the floor like so. And we're going to relax. The next stage is raising that leg on the same side that ball's on. So we're going to lower our head, breathe in. On our breath in, we're going to arch up, pull forward and raise the leg. And we come down. And we're going to repeat that particular element as many times as we need to feel that pain drop off or that discomfort drop off. And we're going to use that traction to really push into the ball and release that psoas. So there you have it, guys. A handy little hip flexor release to help offset all those hours sitting at a desk. Hip bridging. Super useful as we're developing our hinge pattern when we look at being able to use our glutes to drive into that hip extension. Now, starting from the floor, ticking the boxes, here's a couple of hip bridge variations you can do to find out where your weaknesses lie and then what you need to put into your program to help fix those. So the first thing we have, instead of just showing you the boring old double foot hip bridge, we're going to go straight to a single side and we're going to go for a straight leg bridge. Now, laying down, if we then put me upright, this kind of looks like running. So if we have problems getting into hip extension from this position, we should definitely look at avoiding exercises that require full hip extension on a loaded leg. So if we're in the position here, we're simply just bridging off the ground, squeezing the glutes, and it's a short movement there. Our knee on this top leg or this flexion pattern we've got here shouldn't come down and shouldn't take an overly large amount of effort to keep in this locked position. We should be easily able to bridge 15 to 20 reps into that straight leg position. The next upgrade we can do is our leg lock bridge. Now, by using this simple ball here or a bit of feedback, we can lock a hip into place to make sure we can maintain hip flexion whilst going into hip extension on the opposite leg. So locking the ball in, not jamming it right in the crease, but placing it just under the rib cage, palms up, bridging up into position. Now we should be able to get to hip extension without that ball falling out. If that ball falls out, we start again. So 10 to 15, maybe 20 reps in there, working on keeping that leg locked, focusing on the hip flexion and lock part to get into hip extension on that spare leg. We switch the legs, we see which fatigues first, or if we can't maintain the pattern on either side. The final version, once we've mastered those, we can elevate the service and then do an elevated hip bridge. We can still use the components like the leg lock by using the ball tucked in, but the basic setup is simply coming over to a bench, keeping our bum close enough to the bench, heel comes up on top of the bench, we're bridging up into that flexion position on the opposite leg that isn't loaded, and we're driving up into position like so. Now this will isolate your hamstrings a little bit more, and will help you recruit hamstrings into the hip bridge movement. Remember, focus on squeezing the glutes to the roof, full hip extension, maintaining flexion on this opposite leg. There's a couple of hip bridge varieties to help build a strong hip hinge pattern. Now, we're probably thinking stability, what do we need to mobilize for? But the reason why we're going to go through these couple of high impact mobility drills is it highlights any restrictions or range of motion issues in other areas of our body, but also just gets our body and our brain tuned to providing trunk stability at the times we need it, and it's proprioceptive awareness. So we're just moving in ways that will increase our awareness or movement competency to then be able to add stability. So making sure we have the mobility through the stuff we're about to go through is really important, just so we can get into the right position and let our body do the right thing. So our first one is our roller rotations. Now we're going to have that roller tucked between the lower legs, so between the knees, and gripped like so, and we're going to be in a crucifix position on our back. Now the trick here, what we're doing is keeping our shoulders on the floor and dropping that roller to the right and left. Now our shoulders should not peel up off the floor, and we should be able to do it without too much strain. We should be able to maintain our breathing, which we've already learned about. Be able to touch our knee on the floor, each side, without that shoulder peeling up off the floor. What that shows is any particular restrictions on lateral hip or shoulder mobility when we're starting to rotate. And if we talk in terms of trunk stability, it's not just static stability that we talk about, it's dynamic stability when we're driving rotationally into those power movements such as punching, potentially our golf swing and things like that. So learning if there's any restrictions that hinder full range is super important. So we've worked through trigger point and mobilization to enhance our trunk stability. Now it's time to come into the stabilize component to work on anterior stability. And we're also going to have some reciprocal patterning drills to start building in stability whilst those limbs are moving. And as always, we're going to start on our back. So we are going to go through the dead bug. Hands to the roof over shoulders, knees to the roof over hips. Now from here, we're just going to alternate lower hand and leg to the floor. Now, what we're doing with our midsection, we are forcing that lower back into the floor and not letting our lower back peel up off the floor. A good drill we can do is put a towel under our back and have someone pull at it when we're doing the drill. If you can pull the towel out, you're not forcing down as hard as you can. So we can keep a light chin tuck if we need to, but we are going through that dead bug position. Once you've managed to keep that lower back onto the floor with your head relaxed, like so, you have taken that probably as far as you need to. Now, we're going to keep on this path to progressing to standing by coming into a quadruped movement now. Now we have our bird dog. From here, this is the easiest version. Hands under shoulders, knees under hips, and we're extending opposite arm and leg to full elbow and knee extension, like so. This is pretty easy. We're not going to get a lot out of it. Let's ramp it up a notch using our foam roller. So like our crawling drills we've covered in previous masterclasses, we want to have that strong start position, and without that roller falling off the back now, we're going into the bird dog. So if that roller falls off, we're obviously losing that spinal alignment. And that should be enough challenge for us in order to progress the movement. The quad rock with reactive neuromuscular training. So basically what that means, really simple terms, is we use a band or an outside influence to promote the right response. So we're going to be on all fours, stepping through a band here. We're going to place that band over the crease of the bum. Don't do it any higher or it's going to flick over your head. So from here, we're going to walk back to a point where we feel that band pulling us forward. Now, once we have that point where we can feel it trying to pull us towards the anchor point, we're going to put our hands under our shoulders and our knees under our hips. Now, our toes can be pointed or our toes can be pulled under. See what works for you or what you struggle with most. And we're simply going to be raising our hands in a controlled manner without losing our position. You'll notice my spine's neutral. It's not rounding. It's not compensating. It's just in a position here. You can also notice that I'm talking. That means I'm under minimal stress and my breathing isn't being adjusted due to the difficulty, which is what we aim for. Once we can confidently control our breathing through the movement, that's probably had enough effect. Once we get to a point there, we can then push into that quad rock, nice and easy, pulling in with the hips, and we can sink into our squat. So that's our quad rock with our band. That's going to help us then pull into our squat, into a nice controlled position without losing that trunk stability throughout.